All right, how's everybody doing today? Hotep, hey, this is Michael. I'm Hotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. It's Tuesday, July 10th, 2018, and we're live. Hope everybody's doing well today. All right, so I wanted to talk about this story coming out of Florida. And I first saw an article about this going back to July 1st, but it's been so busy, I haven't had a chance to deal with this topic, okay? So everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page, invite your friends to tune in also. All right, and this deals with some private schools in the state of Florida, all right? And you have some private schools that a lot of them are Christian-based schools, but the curriculum that they're teaching downplays slavery. And also in some of these curriculums, they're teaching that humans and dinosaurs live together. All right. So MSN.com has an article about this. Florida private schools curriculum downplays slavery, says humans and dinosaurs live together. And when you teach things like this is extremely dangerous for a number of reasons, because these children that they're teaching today, these are going to be future teachers themselves. They're going to be future police officers, future judges, attorneys, hiring managers, executives of corporations. Somebody may become president of the United States as well. So when you have this false foundation and the real history of slavery is not taught, then when African Americans, when we try to get our issues addressed, because slavery was public policy, and when we try to fight for things like reparations, which is dealing with law also, then we're told it's our fault. Then our issues are pushed to the side because people don't really understand the history of the problem. So this is one of the reasons why something like this is so dangerous, okay? So we're going to talk about Florida private school downplays the history of slavery in their curriculum and says dinosaurs and humans live together. And also we'll talk some about the online course that I teach called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach in school, because the information I teach in our online course, which is on demand, ties right into this, okay? When we see debates over the Confederate monuments, okay? Usually these debates take place because of a lack of understanding of history and lies that have been taught, lies about states' rights and the myth of the myth of the South and the Confederacy being Southern heritage and things like this, right? Those people who talk about Southern heritage, etc., don't say that these 11 Southern states that form the Confederate States of America committed treason against the U.S., took up arms against the U.S., and fought to maintain slavery. Okay, while they said they were fighting for their freedom, they were depriving enslaved Africans of their freedom. Okay, see, that's not talked about. All right, so how's everybody doing? Okay, and so let's look at this article here. I'm going to post the information here for the online course that I teach. We have them in a bundle pack. It's 10 in a bundle pack. It's on sale $60 right now, regular $130, and it's on demand. And it includes Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, where we deal with thousands of years of history. All right. Okay, so in the article, it says that some private schools in Florida, okay, and we know Florida is a Republican state, basically. Some private schools in Florida that rely on public funding teach students that dinosaurs and humans lived together, that God's intervention prevented Catholics from dominating North America, and that slaves who, quote unquote, knew Christ, not N-E-W, but K-N-E-W. Slaves that knew Christ were better off than free men who did not know Christ. This is what they're teaching children right now. I'm not talking about 1965. I'm not talking about 1953, before the Brown versus Board of Education, May of 1957, May 27, 1957. Okay, no, I'm talking about right now. This is what they're teaching, okay, in some private schools in Florida, that enslaved Africans who knew Christ, who were Christians, were better off than African Americans who were free and did not know Christ. Now, the lessons taught at these schools come from 3 Christian publishing companies whose textbooks are popular on many of about 2,000 campuses that accept and often depend on nearly $1 billion in state scholarships or vouchers, okay, state scholarships or vouchers, all right? Okay, now, at the Orlando Sentinel's request, now this is a newspaper publication, this is a local newspaper there in Florida, the Orlando Sentinel. At their request, educators from colleges and school districts reviewed textbooks and workbooks from these publishers, looking at elementary reading, elementary reading and math, middle school social studies, and high school biology materials, okay? So they found numerous instances of distorted history and science lessons that are outside mainstream academics. The books denounce mainstream, the books denounce evolution as untrue, for example, and one book shows a cartoon of men and dinosaurs together, telling students the biblical Noah's Ark, likely brought baby dinosaurs onto his ark. The science books they added seem to discourage students from doing experiments or even asking questions. So what happens is now, okay, so what I say may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness, okay? What I say may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. And okay, this is the book I'm looking for right here, all right? Now, they talk about Noah's Ark, right? How many people have read this book here? Now, my copy is a little old, it's beat up. I got this in 1994, December 31st, 1994. How many people have read this book? Okay, this is by Dr. John G. Jackson, okay? One of our great scholar warriors, Dr. John G. Jackson, who's an ancestor now. This is called Christianity Before Christ by Dr. John G. Jackson. Okay, now what I say may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. People should read this book, okay? Because this deals with the various stories of crucified saviors, okay? And I think he outlines about 27, going back to Osiris, Asar, who the Greeks called Osiris. But he talks about Noah's Ark in here, all right? And we know that the story of Noah's Ark, this is mythology, okay? This is a biblical story. A earlier version of that story comes from an ancient Sumerian myth of a man named U-Nephestim, who builds a ark also, okay? And there's going to be some type of calamity that takes place, and he builds an ark, okay? So he talks about Noah's Ark, pages 29, 31, and 33 here, okay? In Christianity Before Christ. And what people don't seem to understand is that this is mythology, it's a story, okay? There's no evidence that this ever historically took place, Noah's Ark. Now, the question people should ask, so when we read about Noah's Ark, right, he had the animals on the ark, and he had pairs of animals on the ark, right? So the question people should ask themselves is, where did they get all the food to feed the animals on the ark? Where did they get all the water to feed the animals on the ark? And who cleaned up behind all those animals on the ark? Now, if it rained for 40 days and 40 nights continuously, John G. Jackson breaks this down in the book, right? The sea level would have risen by about a mile. If it rained for 40 days and 40 nights continuously, the sea level would have raised about a mile, and every living thing on all the vegetation, the trees, all the vegetation, the plant life on earth would have been killed because it would have been submerged underwater. So the animals that eat plants that were on the ark, what would they have eaten if all the vegetation on earth was killed? So the other thing is that, okay, so he talks about this on page 35, all right? And he says, okay, how long was he in the ark? 370 days. Think of the food necessary for the monsters of the antediluvian world, the animals. 8 persons did all the work. They attended to the wants of 175,000 birds, 3,616 beasts, 1,300 reptiles, and 2 million insects, saying nothing of the countless, and then you also have lower levels of animals, things like this, what they call them, not amoebas or whatever it is, okay? Well, after they all got in, Noah pulled down the window, God shut the door, and the rain commenced, okay? How long did it rain? 40 days. How deep did the water get? About 5.5 miles. Okay, the sea level is going to rise. How much did it rain in a day? Enough to cover the whole world to a depth of about 742 feet. Okay, how many trees can live under miles of water for a year? What became of the soil? Mashed, scattered, dissolved, and covered with the debris of a world. Okay, how were the tender plants and herbs preserved? How were the animals preserved after leaving the ark? There was no grass except such as had been submerged for a year. There were no animals to be devoured by the carnivorous beast. What became of the birds that devoured other birds? Okay, so it's a story, all right? It's all right to have a story. It's all right to have a story. It's all right to have a parable. That's fine. We have those all throughout history, all throughout various cultures. But when mythology, when a parable gets taught as literal history, that's a huge problem. Okay? So read Christianity Before Christ by Dr. John G. Jackson, pages 35 and 36, all right? The other question I would ask is, how long did it take the polar bears at the North Pole to travel to where the ark was to get on the ark? How long did it take the sea lions to swim to get on the ark? How long did it take the penguins from the North Pole to walk or swim to where the ark was to get on the ark? You know, these are legitimate questions. Now, if you ask these questions in Sunday school, you know, see, I grew up Catholic till I was 13. So I went to catechism school on Saturday. Okay. So, you know, I was taught by white nuns. And, you know, we couldn't ask questions like that. We couldn't ask questions like that because we're sitting there looking at the book and they're showing us Noah's Ark and they're showing us Peter, Paul, and Mary, and John, and Ringo. And I mean, not Ringo, but Peter, Paul, you know, they're showing us all these biblical characters that are all white. Okay. So we can ask these questions. All right. You may get hit with the ruler or something like that. All right, so some of you all grew up like that as well. But you ask some of these questions in Sunday school. I mean, it's or Bible study, okay? Because Bible study is a place where you should be able to ask these questions. All right. Okay, so they found everybody okay? All right, so all right. So they found numerous instances of distorted history and science lessons that are outside mainstream academics. The books denounce evolution as untrue, for example, and one shows a cartoon of men and dinosaurs together, telling students the biblical Noah likely brought baby dinosaurs onto his ark. The science books they added seem to discourage students from doing experiments or even asking questions. And when you understand the history of Christianity, now this is not an attack on people, but this is understanding the Eastern Orthodox Christian church, and this is understanding the Catholic Church. Now, the Catholic Church is going to split away from the Eastern Orthodox Church. This doesn't happen till 11th century AD. Around 1052 AD, the Catholic Church comes into existence, contrary to popular belief. But when you study the 21 ecumenical councils that were held from 325 AD up until about 1870, starting with the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, what they're doing is they're really codifying what people are going to believe and what people are going to think. And they're basically saying, coming out of these ecumenical councils, they're saying if people think differently than what we teach, if people believe something different than what we teach, they should be anathematized. And anathematized means that you're going to be, that you're cursed, basically. An anathema, you're basically cursed. So they're trying to codify and really control what the Christians think, what they believe, okay? And they are determining how people pray. They're going to determine that. One of the things that comes out of the First Council of Nicaea is determining, whether people should stand or kneel when they pray. All right. And the real fight at the Council of Nicaea was over Serapis Christos. That's a whole nother conversation, whole nother presentation. But Serapis Christos, which means Christ the Savior. And this was a deity basically introduced by the Melkite Coptic Egyptian priests because Ptolemy the First Soter-Lagi, who was a general of Alexander the Greek, or Alexander the Great. After Alexander the Great dies, Ptolemy the First Soter-Lagi wants to be consecrated as a European pharaoh. So he gets a group of sellout Melkite Coptic Egyptian priests to create this deity of him. And they create this bust, the head, this bust, the deity called Serapis Christos. And Serapis Christos means Christ the Savior. Okay. This is in 320 BC, talking about Christ the Savior. If you read Pagan Origin of the Christ Myth by Dr. John G. Jackson, which is about a 32-page pamphlet he has, on page 8, he talks about the bishops of Serapis, the bishops of Serapis. H.G. Wells, in his book dealing with world history, talks about Serapis Christos. But you can Google Serapis, and they'll show you the bust of his head. I think it's at the Louvre Museum. But it's Serapis, okay, Serapis Christos. And some of the best information on this comes from Dr. Walter Williams. Read The Historical Origin of Christianity, The Historical Origin of Christianity by Dr. Walter Williams. So the real fight at the First Council of Nicaea, if you actually understand history, was over Serapis Christos. And this is when Bishop Arius of Hippo, who was of African descent, he does not attend the First Council of Nicaea because he finds out he's going to be assassinated. And because he's saying that this image that you worship in, this is of a man. The Serapis Christos, he's telling you this image is of a man. This is coming from, Ptolemy the First Soter-Lagi. But it's a whole deep story that I don't have time to get into. But you can start there That goes back to 320 BC. That goes back, and when you study the Melkite Coptic Egyptian priests, when you read the historical origin of Christianity by Dr. Walter Williams, they did not create that image of Serapis Christos for Africans to follow. If you actually understand history. See, we don't understand our history. They did not create that for Africans to follow. That was for Europeans. I'm just saying. Okay. All right. So let's continue here. So you have to understand ancient history, really, to understand the origins of Christianity. Unfortunately, when people talk about the origins of Christianity, yeah, absolutely, it ties into ancient Kemet and the mythology of Osar, Aset, and Heru, and Aset, the virgin giving birth to Heru on December 25th. Yeah, it has to do with that. But you also have to deal, now that mythology goes back to about 3300 BC in ancient Nubia, or what the Greeks call, or what the Greeks call Nubia, what we call Ta-Nehesi, which is the mother of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. But you have to also deal with Serapis Christos being introduced in 320 BC and what happens afterwards, and those ecumenical councils. The first council of Nicaea in 325 AD, the Council of Chalcedon in 381 AD, or the Council of Constantinople, Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, Council of Chalcedon in about 451. You have to deal with these ecumenical councils, which is extremely important. When you read the biblical text, those ecumenical councils are not mentioned in the biblical text. They may be mentioned in footnotes, but these ecumenical councils that shape the way people pray, shape what Christians believe, shape how they practice holidays, shape when Easter, determine when Easter is going to be celebrated, coming out of the last Council of Trent in 1563 AD. Okay, and they're trying to, this is it coming out of the last Council of Trent, is why you have the calendar that we use today called the Gregorian calendar, introduced by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582 AD, coming out of that Council of Trent in 1563, because they were celebrating Easter about 10 days before the vernal equinox. The vernal equinox is March 20th or March 21st. Okay, and this marks the first day of spring. Vernal is Latin, which means spring. Equinox is Latin, which means aquanateum, and which means equal nights. That's what aquanateum means. So the vernal equinox is the day of the year where you have the same amount of daylight as sunlight. This marks the first day of spring. Spring has nothing to do with a rodent seeing its shadow or not seeing its shadow. Okay, a groundhog. And no. That had nothing to do with that. All right, but because they were operating based upon the Julian calendar introduced by Julius Caesar, going back to, I think it's from around 45 BC, something around there. But the astronomer who put together the Julian calendar, okay, his calculations were off by somewhere around 10 or 11 minutes each year, something like that. So by the time you get to the year 1500, they're celebrating Easter 10 days before the vernal equinox. So the his name will come to me in a minute, the astronomer, Sosigenes, that's his name. Okay, so what happened was the Gregorian calendar is going to be introduced in 1582 to correct the calculation of the Julian calendar, which was named after Julius Caesar. And this is the calendar we use today. The Gregorian calendar is based upon how long it takes the Earth to rotate around the sun. It takes 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and about 46 seconds. This is the solar year. And then you have a leap year every 4 years, so everything stays on track, okay? But this comes out of the last Council of Trent, the Council of Trent of 1563. Okay, this is one of the outcomes. So these are these ecumenical councils. So religious literature, so we have to understand the difference between world history and religious literature, right? World history is what happened. Religious literature is the result of what happened. It's going to be at the ecumenical councils that books are taken from the Bible. These are books banned from the Bible, like the Book of Jubilees, right? The Book of Jubilees, which said that Adam and Eve actually had 9 children. And when Cain killed Abel and went to the land of Nod, he took his sister Awan with him, and he reproduced with his sister Awan. Well, it doesn't sound too good to say that they engaged in incest. So they just take that out, and you just see, you know, Cain goes to the land of Nod and it reproduces. Well, if Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel were the only people on earth in the story, then who did he reproduce with? So you have to understand these books that were removed from the Bible, okay? If you're not, I'm not saying it's history, but to understand the story, you have to understand the books that were removed from the Bible. The History Channel had a 2-part series called Banned from the Bible, where they deal with these different books. You go to history.com and research Banned from the Bible, Banned from the Bible, okay? Then Chicago Tribune also had a good article breaking this down. This is called Cain's Wife and Other Mysteries, C-A-I-N, Cain's Wife and Other Mysteries, ChicagoTribune.com, where they talk about Awan, A-W-A-N, and you can just Google Awan, and it'll come up. You can Google Cain, Awan. That was one of his sisters, okay? Just like you could Google Lilith, and it'll tell you that Lilith was Adam's first wife. In the story of Adam and Eve, the mythology, you Google Lilith, it tell you that Lilith was Adam's first wife, and she was disobedient based upon the scriptures. So they introduced a second wife that was more submissive and more obedient, till she listened to the snake. All right, so, okay, so how's everybody doing? All right. Are y'all, some of y'all listening to this at work? Don't get in trouble listening to this at work, okay? All right, how's everybody doing? Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. Be sure to follow us on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. We're talking about this crazy story out of Florida. And a lot of people are finding out I know more about the Bible than they thought I did. But this deals with some private schools in Florida where their curriculum is downplaying slavery, downplaying the history of slavery, and also teaching crazy things like dinosaurs and humans live together, okay? We know that dinosaurs lived millions of years before humans came into existence. They were extinct. Now you're going to have some what we call descendants of dinosaurs, like lizards, okay, probably like crocodiles, alligators, different types of lizards, you know, that they are said to be descendants of dinosaurs, something like that. But you know, you saying a human lived at the same time as a brontosaurus or Tyrannosaurus Rex or Triceratops, or was it Triceratops? I think it is Triceratops. It's like, no, where are you getting that from? Now, here's the other thing that you have to watch. Now, I'm going to give you the names of some of these publishers, right? Look at your children's books, especially if you're in Florida, because they produce books for other states. You have Abeka, A-B-E-K-A, Abeka. You have ACE, Accelerated Christian Education. You also have BJU Press, okay? These are like 3 of these main book publishers, okay? Another thing that happens, and I don't know exactly if they're doing it with this curriculum, but I have seen this done. It was some Christian school, white Christian school. They had a few African-American children, which really, really hurt me to see that. They're teaching that the world is only 6,000 years old when science says it's 4.5 4.6 billion years old, the Earth. They're saying that the Earth is only they're saying that human existence is 6,000 years old. This follows Bishop James Ussher in the 1650s, who said creation started in 4004 BC. This is where the 6,000 years comes from, 4004 BC, October 23rd, 4004 BC, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, if you don't understand science, you don't study science, you don't study archaeological evidence and archaeological discoveries, then you just sit up here and believe this nonsense. So you believe that dinosaurs existed with humans because it has to fit within this 6,000 year period of time. That's nonsense, okay? And usually when you have people teaching things like this, they don't want to deal with science. They don't want to deal with facts. They don't want to deal with science. They don't want to deal with archaeological evidence because it conflicts with what they believe. All right, so Cynthia Bayer, Bayer, is a biology lecturer at the University of Central Florida who reviewed the science books. Okay, she reviewed the science books. She said, quote, students who have learned science in this kind of environment are not prepared for college experiences. Okay, she's a biology lecturer at the University of Central Florida. She said they would be intellectually disadvantaged, okay? Now the article goes on to say, the social studies books downplay the horrors of slavery and the mistreatment of Native Americans. And one book, in its brief description or brief section on the civil rights movement, probably only had 2 paragraphs. But one book in its brief section on the civil rights movement said that, quote, most Black and white Southerners had long lived together in harmony, and that, quote, power-hungry individuals stirred up the people, end quote. So what this seems like is talking about is the myth of the happy slave, right? And we see this myth of the happy slave played out in the movie The Birth of a Nation, which comes out February 8th, 1915, directed by D.W. Griffith. And it takes place during slavery, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. And they show a plantation in Piedmont, South Carolina. And the slave owner, so white, basically wealthy slave owner, the slaves on the plantation love their master. They dance and sing and entertain him and all this stuff. And they're looked at as like part of the family. And this was, 1915 was 50 years after the Civil War ended, which officially ended June 2nd, 1865. And you had some Southerners still bitter. And after slavery ends, the South is making the case that slavery should have been left in place because they said it was a system that benefited everybody, had a system of checks and balances. And the slave master, he took care of the slaves and he was benevolent and the slaves loved him. And they usually depicted African people, especially enslaved African people, as being childlike, as being mentally inferior, to then make the case that they needed to be taken care of, okay, to then justify slavery. See, these myths about the happy slave, they largely come out of the South as a way to justify the system of slavery, okay? But you should, The Birth of a Nation is on YouTube. Check it out. Also, Google The Birth of a Nation. We're talking about the original one from D.W. Griffith. And then if you can get your hands on this book here, Blacks in American Films and Television, Blacks in American Films and Television by Donald Bogle, okay? Because he talks about the film The Birth of a Nation in here, all right? And this is an encyclopedia of African American TV show. Well, I should take that back. It's an encyclopedia of TV shows and movies that featured African Americans in them. Okay, this is about 500 pages. This came out in like 1988. All right, so if it was a movie or TV show that had African Americans in it up until about 1988, it's probably in here. This also has the Cosby Show in here as well. Okay, so they have, let's see, Birth of a Nation is on page 19, starts on page 19. And yeah, some really, really good information. I've done a lot of research on the film, The Birth of a Nation. Also, the NAACP protested the movie when it came out as well. They're protesting in Boston. William Monroe Trotter, we know, protesting in Boston, but also other cities. The NAACP led protests against the movie because we knew it was detrimental. We knew it was detrimental to us. All right, so yeah, Dr. Cameron, that's his name. I knew he's a doctor, I forgot his last name. So Dr. Cameron, an Old South Civil War Reconstruction era drama, The Birth of a Nation, focuses on the family of the kindly Dr. Cameron on the Cameron plantation in Piedmont, South Carolina. Masters and slaves are friendly. In the fields, the slaves contentedly pick cotton, and they're going to dance and perform for their white masters. Outside the slave quarters, you have slave women joyously runs the big house. All is calm at peace in order. All is calm at peace in order during these glory days of the Old South, during slavery. Then the Civil War breaks out. The old world of gentility collapses. A troop of Negro raiders terrorizes the Cameron family, and all the South undergoes ruin, devastation, rapine, and pillage. Afterward, during the Reconstruction period, carpetbaggers led by the corrupt white Senator Stoneman and uppity Negroes from the North move into Piedmont, South Carolina, exploiting and corrupting the former slaves, unleashing the sadism and bestiality innate in the Negro, turning the once congenial former slaves into renegades and using them to, quote, crush the white South under the heel of the black South, end quote. Lawlessness runs riot. Lawlessness runs riot. Read one of the title cards, because the movie was 3 hours, but it was a silent movie. Okay, so what they're saying is everything was fine until these Yankees came down here messing with our system of slavery, and they ruined the South. All right. Well, when you look at what they're saying here, when they talk about the civil rights movement in one of the textbooks from one of these three publishers, in a brief section on civil rights, on the civil rights movement, they said, quote, most black and white Southerners had long lived together in harmony, and that, quote, power-hungry individuals stirred up the people, end quote. Well, that's what you see displayed in 1915 in the movie The Birth of the Nation. They're talking about what's being taught right now in some of these private schools in Florida in 2018. Now, if you don't understand history and you don't understand that's a lie. You don't understand that's a lie. Okay, so the books are rife with religious and political opinions on topics such as abortion, gay rights, and the Endangered Species Act. The Endangered Species Act, which one labels a, quote, radical social agenda, end quote. They disparage religions other than Protestant Christianity and cultures other than those descended from white Europeans. So this is all dealing with enforcing white supremacy, enforcing a white version of Christianity. I don't think they show Jesus as being black and his mama being black and his daddy being black, or his surrogate daddy. I don't think they showed that. They disparage religions other than Protestant Christianity and cultures, they disparage cultures other than those descended from white Europeans. Experts said that was particularly worrisome, given that about 60% of scholarship students at these private schools are African American and Hispanic. They're being brainwashed. They're being brainwashed by this garbage. Okay? So if any of your children are at these type of schools, you got to take them out of here. You got to take them out of here. You got to find another school to put them in, find a public school, do homeschooling, find a homeschooling network. Okay? This July 13th through the 15th in Atlanta. You all know I'm at the Black Homeschooling Conference in Atlanta, the Liberated Minds Black Homeschooling Education Expo. Visit liberatedmindsexpo.com. It happens the third weekend in July of each year, the Black Homeschooling Conference. I'm there each year. I'm a presenter this year, and I'm on 2 panels, and I'm a vendor as well. Okay? Let me post this information here. You go to their website, check this out. Even if your children go to a traditional school and you're going to leave them in a traditional school, you can still get resources to teach some supplemental information at home on the weekends and the evenings. But also you can create these homeschooling, these educational networks with your friends and your family and things like this, okay? liberatedmindsexpo.com. All right, how's everybody doing? Okay, so how y'all like this type of information? And I ended up talking about some other topics, some other things I really didn't plan to talk about, but hey, it fits with it. How you all like this type of information? All right, now, I'm gonna show you some additional information here, but 2 quick things. Be sure to register for the online courses that I teach, because they're all on demand. It includes understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. That's a 14-hour, 7-session online course, all on demand. We deal with thousands of years of history. It's called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. That counteracts a lot of this garbage, and you can share it with your children, because I don't curse in there. Out of 14 hours, I think I may say 1 bad word, but it's not that bad. So I don't curse on there, things that I don't deal with vulgarities and things like that. Okay, so you can share it. You can share it with your children. Now, when we talk about slavery, of course, some of it is not so pleasant, but I don't get into like the real gore and things like this, but we deal with ancient Egypt. We deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. So that's on sale right now, $60, regularly $130. It's a 10-course bundle pack. Also includes Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization, and African American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences, okay? African American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences, all right? And if people had listened to what I was saying back during the 2016 election cycle, Donald Trump would not be president today, because all this stuff I warned you about then. And I told you that Vladimir Putin favored Trump over Clinton, all this stuff. I talked about all of this, all right? Also, we have a special promotion. You can advertise with the African History Network. If you're an African-American business owner, you want to take your business to the next level, reach thousands of potential customers. We have a special promotion, buy 1 month, get 1 month free. We put your 30-second to 60-second commercial in the audio podcast of our radio shows that are on iTunes and Castbox and Blog Talk Radio, other platforms. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com, customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. We have a special promotion running that ends Tuesday, July 10th, 11:59 p.m. Buy 1 month, get 1 month free, all right? Okay, let's go to some of your comments here. Just a second. Sean says superb. Rebecca said it's great. Bettise Gordon said awesome. Vincent said love it. Okay, thank you. So be sure, for those of you who like this type of information, be sure to register for the online courses we teach. They're all on demand. You can watch from around the world. You can watch as soon as you register. Even watch it work if you want to. So we'll post the link here again. And it's also at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, okay? And let's see, lastly, also, if you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, help support us, helps us stay on the air. It helps me also pay when I have to travel to events like I got to do, leaving, I'll be in Atlanta this weekend, okay? I'm paying my way there. PayPal.me/the AHN show, PayPal.me/the AHN show, okay? PayPal.me/the AHN show. All right, so the book publishers, there are three main book publishers that they cite. They are Abeka, ABEKA, BJU Press, and Accelerated Christian Education, also known as ACE, Accelerated Christian Education, okay? If you see books from your children, from their school, by any of these publishers, you need to pay really close attention to them, okay? So these three publishers also offer easier academics compared with what Florida requires in its public schools, with easier academics compared with what Florida requires in its public schools, said the experts from the University of Florida, okay, Rollins College and the Seminole and Volusia County School Districts. That's VOLUSIA, okay? All right. Now, the article goes on to say, neither ACE nor BJU responded to requests for comment. In an email, an Abeka official named Brent Phillips declined to discuss the materials, but wrote, quote, "We are confident," and let me try to find this here. Okay. He said, "We are confident that our content is accurate, age appropriate, and academically rigorous, and teaches students based on, quote, our traditional Christian philosophy of education," our traditional Christian philosophy of education, okay? Their information is soundly historically inaccurate, and they need to be challenged on this, okay? The parents have to get together and challenge them on this nonsense. All right, now, the article goes on to say, because this is about 7 or 8 pages, so I'm just giving you the highlights here. It goes on to say, from all the publishers, the social studies texts seem intent on writing American history, quote unquote, from God's point of view, as interpreted through a conservative Protestant lens, said Christopher Bussey, who's an education professor at the University of Florida. And he reviewed these materials. He said, quote, "I believe in God, I consider myself a Christian, and this is not my point of view," okay? Now, the texts focus on white men, they ignore women, and sometimes insult people from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Worrisome given, now this is worrisome given the fact that students using them in Florida. Okay, this is worrisome given the fact that these students are using this in Florida, and a lot of these students are African-American Hispanic students, okay? Let's see, it goes on to say, "You're sending a dangerous message to these students in particular, as if they are punished in their own history," as if they are punished in their own history. All right, now historically, that has been a problem with many textbooks, including those used in public schools, okay? But Christopher Bussey said that the Christian ones were far worse than others he had reviewed. Now, the BJU Press text said, for instance, that, quote unquote, God provided North Americans, or provided North America. Let me see here. Yeah, God provided North America as a place for the Protestant church to flourish, keeping Catholics to Central America and South America. And then an accelerated Christian education workbook, ACE, an accelerated Christian education workbook, notes that Native Americans were forced off their lands, but then blames Native Americans for becoming, quote unquote, dependent on their government. Well, wait a second. The U.S. stole their land and killed off many Native Americans. But then you're going to blame Native Americans for being dependent upon the government. Who stole their land? Who sent them to Indian schools? There were about 150 Indian schools in the late 1800s, early 1900s, like the 1879, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School starts by U.S. Cavalry Captain Richard Henry Pratt. And these schools were started to teach Native Americans. These were boarding schools, and they would take the Native American children to these boarding schools, dress them up like white people, cut their hair, take the earrings out of their ears, teach them Christianity, teach them English, and teach them to hate being Native American. And this drove a cultural wedge and a generational wedge between the children and their parents and their grandparents. Okay, this is history. Read the article from history.com. Government boarding schools once separated Native American children from families. Government boarding schools once separated Native American children from families. Okay, this is from history.com, which is the official website of the History Channel. And we'll post this link here. Okay, so then the Abeka book from the Abeka Publishing Company said in a section on, quote unquote, evangelizing Black Americans, they said that, quote, the slave who knew Christ had more freedom than a free person who did not know the Savior. Really? See, this goes back to the myth of the happy Christian slave. This goes back to the myth of the happy Christian slave. This is what the South was promoting to justify slavery. And we're going to see this intensify also in 1852 and afterwards, because 1852 is when Harriet Beecher Stowe comes out with a novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin, which really exposes America to the horrors of slavery. And this is going to help galvanize the abolitionist movement. Okay, when the book Uncle Tom's Cabin comes out, that book is banned in the state of Maryland. Okay, because see, the character of Uncle Tom was based upon a real life man who was a runaway slave named Josiah Henson. And Josiah Henson is going to escape from a plantation in Maryland, and he gets his family free also. They go up into Canada, and he becomes a Methodist minister and educator, and he works on the Underground Railroad. Okay, and helps enslaved Africans become free. Well, Harriet Beecher Stowe read his autobiography, and she based the character of Uncle Tom in Uncle Tom's Cabin based upon this real life person named Josiah Henson. Now, we all heard about Josiah Henson probably when we were younger, but we probably didn't know it. It was on an episode of the TV show The Jeffersons. So Louise's cousin, I think it's her cousin, is coming to visit, and he's a butler. So he's played by the actor who played Alderman Davis on Good Times. You know, tall, light-skinned, bald-headed actor. And he's a butler. So on the Jeffersons, he's Louise's cousin. He's a butler, and he speaks very dignified. George calls him Sadiddy. Okay, George makes fun of him, says he's a ditty, and think he works for these white folks, right? But the white man who he works for has a library in his home. Okay, and this is something that you notice about, you know, when you see a lot of these homes, and especially slave plantations, when you see movies like that. But if you see, even if you watch Leave It to Beaver, you pay attention. Ward Cleaver had a den, right? And he had like a desk in there, kind of like his office. If you look behind him is a bookshelf with all these books. When you go and you pay attention to these shows, like a lot of these old shows, a lot of these old movies, especially when they show people who are wealthy, you see them with bookshelves and libraries in their home. Interesting. Now they have that, but enslaved Africans were forbidden in general to read. I wonder why. How is it that the wealthy people and the well-to-do people have books and bookshelves and libraries in their home, right? But they made it illegal for enslaved Africans in general to read. Now, in Virginia, it was legal for enslaved Africans to read up until 1831. They changed that after the Nat Turner Rebellion of 1831 because Nat Turner was literate. They said, oh no, Nat Turner was a slave who could read and write, and he could read the Bible, and he used the Bible as a tool to teach his people they were supposed to be free. They said, oh no, we're gonna change this right here. So the state legislature voted to make it illegal for slaves to learn to read and write after the Nat Turner Rebellion, after they captured and killed him November 11th, 1831. They executed him, hung him, and cut his body up into pieces and ground up his body, everything. They had an intense hatred for Nat Turner, okay? Not for what they were doing to enslaved Africans, but what Nat Turner did because of what they were doing to enslaved Africans, right? Okay, so, all right. Okay, so we have Angie here. The government actually paid the colonizers to kill off the buffalo and gave them the land to keep the Indians off the land. Yeah. So if you look at that episode of Jeffersons, George calls Louise's cousin. He calls him Uncle Tom, right? And her cousin explains to him who Uncle Tom actually was. In the novel, Uncle Tom was the hero. Okay, he was the slave that took cotton out of his sack and put it in the other slave sacks so they could meet their quota and wouldn't get whippings. He was a slave that refused to beat black women, and he's going to be beaten to death one day by the slave master Simon Legree. Okay, now the slave that followed Simon Legree around and did the dirt, his name was Sambo. All right, but Uncle Tom was a hero. But a lot of people don't know this, okay? And so in the state of Maryland, where he was, where Josiah Henson was from, the book Uncle Tom's Cabin was banned. That book was banned, and Dr. Claude Anderson talks about this in Dirty Little Secrets About Black History, Volume 1, I think it is, Volume 1. But you had one free African-American man who got caught with a copy of that book, and he got 10 years in prison for having a copy of this book. Because they banned it, because, see, Josiah Henson was from Maryland. Maryland was a slaveholding state. And this book helped to really expose the horrors of slavery. And 2 years later, you're going to have the Republican Party formed by groups of abolitionists. And 6 years after that, their candidate for president is going to become president-elect November 6, 1860, named Abraham Lincoln. And then you're going to have the Civil War that starts the year after, April 12, 1861. Yeah, the Civil War that starts, all right? Okay. So everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Ron said, okay, thanks for sharing the program. Here, okay. All right, so let me show you some of this information. So check out the rest of this article here. I gave you the highlights. It's a long article. I don't have time to get through all of it. This is from MSN.com, but this is, I mean, what they're teaching is just crazy. And our parents need to know about this so we can protect our students from this type of nonsense. Florida private schools curriculum downplays slavery, says humans and dinosaurs live together. Okay, it's just absolutely ridiculous. All right, let me pull up this PowerPoint. Now, also there's a study that came out from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it's called Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. Okay, and I talk about this some also in some of my presentations. I'm going to show you some of the slides and talk some about what we deal with in the online course that I teach called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, I'm going to deal with some of that information here. All right, so let's try to pull up this slide here. All right, so there was an article from theatlantic.com that came out February 1st, 2018, first day of African American History Month, okay? And this article dealt with what kids really learn, what kids are really learning about slavery, what kids are really learning about slavery, okay? And this coincides with the article that I just shared with you, okay? How slavery is being mistaught in the schools. And it talks about how a new report finds that the topic of slavery is mistaught and often sentimentalized, and students are alarmingly misinformed as a result. Students are alarmingly misinformed as a result, okay? And here's a picture from the article. And now this statue here is of Abraham Lincoln, and it's called the Lincoln Emancipation Statue. This was paid for by enslaved African people and erected in Washington, D.C. in 1876. So this was 11 years after the Civil War ended. And it has been criticized for representing the history of slavery from a paternalistic perspective. Okay, representing the history of slavery from a paternalistic perspective. All right. So when we look at this article, when we look at this from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and this is the actual study here also. I'll give you the link so you can download it, because this is something good for you to use. And then when you go through our online course, this is something good you can use along with it. You can use this to also help teach your children as well. All right. So I downloaded it. It's 52 pages. I got it printed up. It's called Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. Okay. So the article talks about how a new report released by the Southern Poverty Law Center's Teaching Tolerance Project points to the widespread failure to accurately teach the hard and nuanced history of American slavery and enslaved people. Collectively, the report finds that slavery is mistaught, mischaracterized, sanitized, and sentimentalized, leaving students poorly educated, as we just saw from the example coming out of some of those Florida public schools, poorly educated, and contemporary issues of race and racism misunderstood. So if you don't understand the history of the past, you won't understand the issues of today. The issues of today are built upon the foundation of the history of the past. If that foundation is slanted, then the house is going to have cracks in the structure is going to be weak, and it'll probably crumble. All right. So this was a study. They did an online survey of 1,000 American high school seniors and more than 1,700 social studies teachers. Okay. And they also reviewed 10 commonly used U.S. history textbooks and examined 15 sets of state standards to assess what students know. All right. So here's what they found. They found that only 8% of high school seniors surveyed, knew that slavery was the central reason why the Civil War was fought. Only 8% of 12th graders, they're studying history. Okay, they're taking American history, they're taking, American government, things like this. Only 32%, less than a third, only 32% could correctly name the 13th Amendment as the formal end to U.S. chattel slavery. All right, 35% thought it was the Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863, which did not free the enslaved Africans. And less than half, only 46%, could identify the Middle Passage as the transport of enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean to North America. Read this article from theatlantic.com, What Kids Are Really Learning About Slavery. What kids are really learning about slavery. This came out the first day of African American History Month, okay, February 1st, 2018. So when we have these debates over the Confederate monuments, right? And should they stay or should they go? And you have somebody like Donald John Trump, who's totally ignorant of history and says they should stay, they're part of our history and things like this, man. Countries don't honor traitors. They don't honor people who committed treason. They don't have statues honoring this. Now, the question we should ask ourselves, and most people don't know this, right? There were 11 states in the Confederacy. Why are there Confederate monuments in 31 states in the Union? There are Confederate monuments in 31 states in the Union. History.com has an article called Why Are There So Many Confederate Monuments? Okay, we'll post that link for you. You got to read that article. Because the Confederate monuments were largely erected to terrorize African Americans after slavery ends and keep us in a low subordinate position in society. So here's some of the things that we deal with in the online class. We do what was the transatlantic slave trade? What were some of the events that led up to the transatlantic slave trade starting? What role did Christopher Columbus play? Because Columbus is central to the transatlantic slave trade, to the spread of it, okay? And also, we have to keep in mind that Columbus never came to the land we call the United States of America, all right? So he's born Cristoforo Colombo, okay? He's also known as Cristobal Colon. In Spanish, it's Cristobal Colon, okay? He was born in Genoa, Italy, all right? So it's Cristoforo Colombo in Italian, Cristobal Colon in Spanish. The anglicized version of his name is Christopher Columbus, all right? So he's born in 1451 in Genoa, Italy. He dies in 1506 in Spain. When we look at where he goes on his 4 voyages, he never comes to the land that we call the United States of America. He's in Central America, South America, and he's in the Caribbean. So August 3rd, 1492, he sets sail on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and he lands in the Bahamas, or what he called San Salvador. San Salvador means Saint Savior. Okay, he said he named it after his Savior, Jesus the Christ. He also goes into Cuba and the Hispaniola, or what we call Haiti. All right, now, and then he goes into second voyage. He goes to the West Indies, 1493, and Puerto Rico, Berwickman, Jamaica, 1494. May 1498 goes into Trinidad and Venezuela mainland and South America. 1504, his last and 4th voyage, he goes into Panama and Honduras in Central America. Okay, all right. Now, today is also the anniversary, if I remember correctly, is the anniversary of the Bahamas declaring their independence also, okay? Anniversary of them declaring their independence. There's an article from blackamericaweb.com that talks about this as well, so check that out. They talked about it this morning on the Time Joyner Morning Show, okay? All right, let's pull this back up here. Okay, if you need me to post a link again so you can register for the online course, let me know. I'll post it again. It's also at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, so let's look at some of the other things we deal with. Okay, because this it's all on demand. It's a 14-hour online course, and it's all on demand. Where is? Let's see here. Let's try to share it again. Just a second here. Share the screen. All right, there we go. All right, so we also deal with when did Africans first come to the U.S. as slaves? Because we were here going back at least 51,700 years. You're dealing with the Khoisan, who have the oldest DNA on the planet, but they were free. But as enslaved Africans, the Spanish were taking Africans into the territory we call South Carolina in the 1520s. This is 100 years before Jamestown, Virginia. We deal with, did Africans sell themselves into slavery? Were African people in America before the slave trade? We deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. And it's critical. You can't understand the transatlantic slave trade from about 1440 to 1888. You can't understand that till you understand the previous 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. So when I teach this, we try to go chronologically. We have PowerPoint presentations, video clips, book references. So it's a lot, and it's all on demand. You go at your own pace. We do with shocking archaeological discoveries that are causing experts to rethink everything, because you have to deal with the archaeological discoveries, because when these discoveries come out, they're causing them to have to push the dates back. Insurance companies that took out policies on slave ships and enslaved Africans on plantations. There were over 40 insurance companies in the U.S. that took out insurance policies on enslaved Africans on the plantations. We do a Freemasonry, America and the Founding Fathers, origins of the term America, Africa, and more. We deal with the problem with slave movies, while we're being bombarded with slave movies and a slave-themed TV show. We deal with the mythology of Asar, Aset, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and the origins of the Immaculate Conception story. Links to ancient Kemet, Egypt, and early Christianity, and also the fake Willie Lynch letter 1712, because Willie Lynch never historically existed. Okay, Willie Lynch never historically existed. You need to take the Willie Lynch letter, throw it in the garbage can. Willie Lynch never historically existed. The words in the Willie Lynch letter didn't even exist in the early 18th century in 1712. Okay, and when you study history, you don't read about a Willie Lynch anywhere. Now, there was a Captain Willie Lynch in the 19th century, in the 1800s, but that's a totally different time period. All right, so we have to understand Willie Lynch is not history. We need to stop talking about the Willie Lynch syndrome, Willie Lynch this, Willie Lynch that. He never historically existed. You're giving the lie too much power. All right, so let's see here. Let's continue here. Okay, so and when we deal with the, let's look at the Moors for a minute here. So we have to understand the 800-year occupation. We have to understand January 2nd, 1492, when the Moors lose control of the last stronghold in Spain, which is Grenada. And the Moors are taking the teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, into Europe. They're taking the teachings from ancient Egypt into Europe. And this is what's going to bring Europeans out of the Dark Ages. When the Moors go in 711 AD, 85 to 90% of Europeans are illiterate. They can neither read nor write. The Moors are teaching them to read and write. They're taking teachings from ancient Kemet. They're introducing alchemy, or what we call chemistry, spherical globes, almanacs, different types of food, different types of surgical instruments, different types of surgical procedures, all this stuff they're introducing into Europe. So when we see something like this, we see the Washington Monument, right, which is 555 feet tall. We see the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Monument. And then we see this structure in ancient Kemet, which is called a tekhen, which is what the Washington Monument is. The Greeks called it an obelisk. And it is a symbol of resurrection, transformation, comes straight out of ancient Kemet. It's a spiritual symbol. There were 1,200 tekhenu for plural, throughout ancient Egypt. Today, there are only about 12. They've been taken to other parts of the world, Istanbul, Turkey, and Paris, France, and Vatican City, things like this, right? But when we look at Freemasonry, because 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. This is why you see these symbols representing ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. okay? Because the teachings from ancient Kemet form the foundation of Freemasonry. All right, it's a watered down version that they're dealing with, but this is information brought into Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. So the word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun. The word Mason is derived from the Latin words mass and sun. Mason means child of light, and expresses the desire to pursue light, which is the desire to pursue light, which is a symbol of knowledge, the symbol of knowledge. Now, the term child of light or sons and daughters of light was used to first identify students who completed 42 years of study in the temples of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. Now, many Masonic temples who were modeled after the temples of Kemet, places where light knowledge was imparted in a series of steps or degrees. So when we go to college today and we get our credentials in a series of degrees, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD, doctoral of psychology, doctoral degrees, things like this. This is where this comes from, getting your credentials, getting that knowledge imparted in a series of steps or degrees. This is where this comes from. Also, the concept of liberal arts comes from the teachings from ancient Kemet, the 7 liberal arts, the rhetoric and logic and arithmetic, things like this. And they were broken up into what were known as the trivium and the quadrivium, the 3 and the 4. So George G.M. James talks about this in his book, Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James. He talks about 7 liberal arts and the trivium and the quadrivium. Okay, read pages 18 and 32 of Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Brown. This is one of the books that I reference in the online course. So you don't have to have any of these books to follow along, but I use these as reference. And also 50 of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence were Freemasons, and 13 of the 39 signers of the U.S. Constitution were Freemasons also, right? Here's a bronze statue of Osiris, Set, and Heru, who the Greeks called Osiris, Isis, or Horus. We see Isis comes up in the DC Comics universe with their TV show that used to come on in 1970 Saturday morning. They had the Shazam and Isis Hour. I used to watch that every weekend. And we see this white woman named Isis, and in the show, at the beginning of the show, when they have like the trailer, it tells you she got her powers from ancient Egypt. She got her powers from Hathor or Het Heru. It's a deity, a Neteru, a goddess. And we see these symbols of ancient Egypt, but we don't realize that Isis was not a white woman. Isis or Aset. This is a copy of, coming out of African mythology, of an African woman, Aset, who gave birth to the baby Heru, or Horus, who the Greeks call Horus, H-O-U-R-S, on December 25th. And then from that story of Aset, one of the first stories of an Immaculate Conception, from that story you get the story of the Black Madonna and Child, which was worshipped all throughout Europe. And then from that you get the decolorized version, okay, of Mary and Jesus, or Yeshua, because the letter J wasn't introduced till 1630 AD. Read chapter 9 of The Historical Origins of Christianity by Dr. Walter Williams, because chapter 9 deals with the whole history of the letter J, all right? So we deal with different time periods. We try to deal with things chronologically, because historical events don't happen in a vacuum. They are the result of a sequence of historical events that lead up to other events taking place, okay? So you have to understand this. And like I said, we talk about the role life insurance companies played. There's a lot that we deal with okay? So this is it's all on demand. It's a online course that I teach. Took a long time to develop this, really, to the point that it is now. It's called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, all right? So it's a 14-hour, 7-session online course. You can go at your own pace. It's all on demand. And let's see here. Okay. Yeah, it's all on demand. And in that bundle pack, so it's on sale $60, regularly $130. You can watch them around the world. In that bundle pack, you also get Great African Women in History, the Mothers of Civilization. You get African American Resistance in the Era of Donald Trump, Voter Suppression, Reparations, and How Elections Have Consequences. You also get an online class I did dealing with the film Black Panther on March 31st. It's a lot in there, okay? So it's a total of 10 courses. All right, any questions before we get out of here? Okay, and then also, if you want to donate to the African History Network, you can do that at paypal.me/the AHN show. That helps us to stay on the air, keep broadcasting our radio show, keep doing the research, pay the bills, stay on the air. Also helps me get to travel to these different events because I'm headed to Atlanta. I'll be in Atlanta Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday for the Black Homeschooling Conference. So I'm paying my way to Atlanta, so that helps. With that, and I'll be broadcasting from Atlanta as well. Twilla, hey, how you doing, Twilla? All right. Okay, so paypal.me/the AHN show. We just posted that there. I'm trying to get some of your comments here. See if I missed any. Okay. All right, and be sure to listen to the African History Network show Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation. Visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can listen to the podcast of the shows there. We also have information how to listen to the show live. Okay, will you do an analysis of the movie Purge? I'm not sure. I haven't seen that movie yet. I do have a lecture dealing with analysis of the film Black Panther. That presentation is almost 3 hours. That's a deep movie. Black Panther. So I'll be speaking at the Black Homeschooling Conference in Atlanta. I'll be speaking on Sunday, July 16th, 2018. My presentation is called Lessons from the Film Black Panther, Economic Guerrilla Warfare, Political Self-Defense, and How to Wakanda the Vote. We also have it available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, okay. So are we still on? Can you all still see me here? Okay, because the phone's acting up for some reason. Don't know what's going on. Okay, now it's working. All right. Okay, so look, we're going to get out of here. And any business owners, remember you can advertise with the African History Network as well. We have a special promotion going on. Buy 1 month, get 1 month free, take your business to the next level. Email me for more information. Customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Customer service at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com for more information on that, okay? I understand, but we still need to understand what's going on in the public school system despite the curriculum. Yeah, that's true. I agree with that, Darlene. All right. So look, we have to get out of here. Hey, remember at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with, it's based upon what you think about yourself. Right now it's correct wrong behavior. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.